At our annual family dinner, my son's voice exploded across the restaurant. "Go beg on the streets, you beggar." 50 people froze. Every head turned, every eye locked on me. I stood there, trembling, my purse clutched against my chest. My face burned with shame, my throat closed so tight I couldn't breathe. For a moment, the entire world collapsed down to just his words, echoing in my head. Then I took a deep breath. I raised my hand slowly, deliberately. I waved for the waiter, and when I spoke, my voice was calm, steady, cold as winter. "Fine, but if anyone will leave, it won't be me." Robert laughed. Sarah smirked. Their son Marcus pointed his phone at me, recording every second of my humiliation. None of them understood what just happened. The gold leaf sits on the corner of 5th and Market. You don't stumble onto it by accident. You either belong there or you don't. I pushed through the heavy door into warmth and the smell of money. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings. White tablecloths covered every table. A man played piano in the corner, something soft and forgettable. The murmur of conversations about stock options and vacation homes filled the air. I saw them immediately at the corner table. Robert in his expensive charcoal suit. Sarah beside him, blonde and sharp, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Marcus hunched over his phone, ignoring everything. 3 champagne glasses sat on their table. Oysters on ice, something with truffles. They were celebrating without me. My hands tightened on my purse as I walked toward them. Nobody noticed me at first. Robert was telling a story, his hands moving dramatically. Sarah laughed and touched his arm. Marcus scrolled on his phone, bored with the world. I reached their table and stood there, waiting for someone to acknowledge me. Sarah saw me first. Her smile flickered and died like a candle. She touched Robert's arm, a silent warning. He looked up, and his expression shifted from relaxed to irritated in half a second. Marcus glanced up from his phone. "Grandma," he said, the word dripping with disdain. "This is a family dinner, for people who actually contribute to the family." The words hit like a slap, but I kept my face neutral. I looked at Robert, my son, the boy I raised. "Good evening," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted. "May I join you?" Silence stretched between us like a chasm. Robert studied his menu like he'd never seen it before. Sarah shifted in her seat, uncomfortable but not kind. Neither of them answered me. Neither of them even looked at me properly. "Robert," I tried again, desperation creeping into my voice. "Your text said you wanted to see me tonight." My words hung in the air, unanswered. Sarah leaned forward with that honey-sweet voice that hid poison. "Jennifer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This is a private celebration, family business. I'm sure you understand." Her smile wasn't a smile at all. I didn't understand. I was family. I was his mother. But standing there, looking at their closed faces and turned shoulders, I understood something else entirely. I wasn't family anymore. I was an inconvenience. A problem to be managed. A burden they wanted to shed. "Please," I said, the word coming out desperate and broken. "I just wanted to—" "Mother." Robert's voice cut through mine like a blade. He still wasn't looking at me. Then he stood up, fast and angry. His chair scraped against the floor, loud enough to cut through the piano music, loud enough to make people at nearby tables stop talking and turn. The restaurant started to go quiet around us. Robert stood over me, tall and imposing. His face was flushed red, wine or anger, I couldn't tell. The conversations around us died in waves, spreading outward from our table like ripples. "Mother," he said again, louder this time, making sure people could hear. "Let me make something very clear to you." My heart hammered in my chest. I could feel dozens of eyes turning toward us. "You have been cut off for a reason." His voice rose with each word, echoing through the now silent restaurant. "We are not your ATM. We are not your retirement plan." The restaurant went completely silent. Even the piano stopped mid-phrase. 50 people stared at us, at me, the pathetic old woman being destroyed by her own son. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. "If you need money so desperately," Robert continued, pausing to look around at his growing audience. He wanted witnesses. He wanted everyone to see this. "If you're so broke that you have to crash our private dinner," he smiled then, cold and cruel and satisfied, the smile of someone who thinks they've already won. "Then go beg on the streets, you beggar." The words exploded across the restaurant like a bomb. Time stopped. the words hung in the air like smoke. 50 pairs of eyes locked on me, watching, judging, pitying. My face burned with shame so intense it felt like fire. Sarah looked away, studying her manicure like this had nothing to do with her. Marcus lifted his phone higher, the red recording light glowing. He was filming this, streaming it, turning my humiliation into entertainment for strangers. Around us, the whispers started. "Poor woman," someone said. "How awful," another voice murmured. At her age, a third person added, "Someone should help her," but nobody moved. I stood there frozen, drowning in shame. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, I was that little girl again, the one who was told she wasn't smart enough, the one who spent her whole life being invisible. Then something shifted inside me. The shame crystallized into something else, something cold and clear and sharp as a knife. The trembling stopped, my spine straightened. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time in years. Not as my child, but as the man who just made the biggest mistake of his life. I took a deep breath, slow and deliberate. The entire restaurant held its breath with me. Every eye was watching, waiting to see what the broken old woman would do next. I raised my hand, calm and graceful, like I was hailing a taxi on a sunny afternoon. A young waiter hurried over, his face full of sympathy and discomfort. "Poor old lady," his eyes said. I kept my gaze locked on Robert. When I spoke, my voice was quiet but steady. Every word was measured and cold. "Fine," I said. The single word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. "But it's you all who will have to leave here." The words came out calm, almost peaceful, like I was commenting on the weather, like I hadn't just been humiliated in front of 50 strangers. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Robert stared at me, confused. Then understanding hit, and he threw his head back and laughed. Real laughter. Genuine amusement at my pathetic threat. "Oh my God." He looked at Sarah, at Marcus, his grin wide and cruel. "This is incredible. What are you going to do, Mother? Call the manager? Have a tantrum?" Sarah finally looked up, a smirk playing on her perfect lips. She shook her head slowly, like I was a toddler having a meltdown. "Jennifer, honey, maybe you should just go home. You're embarrassing yourself." Marcus zoomed in with his phone, capturing every detail of my face. "This is amazing," he muttered, reading his screen. "Grandma's completely losing it. This is already at 20,000 views." His voice was gleeful, excited by my pain. The other diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked away, embarrassed for me. Others leaned in, fascinated by the drama unfolding before them. The whispers grew louder around us. "Dementia, probably," someone said behind me. "So sad," another voice agreed. "At that age, you never know. Someone should call someone, but nobody did anything. Nobody helped." Robert was still laughing, sharing a look with Sarah. They thought this was over. They thought they'd won. Marcus was typing on his phone, probably responding to comments about his viral video. None of them saw what was coming. None of them understood what they'd just done. But they would. Very soon they would. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain or plead or cry. I simply turned away from their table and walked, one foot in front of the other, steady and calm. There was an empty table by the window, just 10 feet from where they sat. I walked to it with my head high. I sat down slowly. I placed my purse carefully on the white tablecloth. I smoothed my napkin across my lap with steady hands. I folded my hands in front of me, proper and composed, like I was having tea with the Queen, like nothing had happened at all. The young waiter followed me, concern written all over his face. "Ma'am," he said gently, like he was talking to someone fragile. "Can I get you anything?" His kindness almost broke me. "Earl Grey tea, please," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I'll be here for a while. There's no rush." He nodded quickly and hurried away, probably grateful to escape the awkward situation. I sat alone at my table by the window. Outside, the city sparkled with lights. Inside, life went on around me. Behind me, Robert's table erupted in laughter. I heard champagne being poured. I heard Sarah saying something that made Robert laugh harder. I heard Marcus reading comments from his phone, delighted by the attention. The restaurant resumed its normal rhythm. The piano started again, picking up where it left off. Conversations returned to normal volumes. The drama was over. The sad old lady had been handled, put in her place. Everyone could forget I existed. I sat with my hands folded, my face calm, but inside my mind was racing, calculating, checking off boxes on a list I'd been building for 18 months. Everything was going exactly as planned. I checked my watch. 7:47. The second hand swept around the face, steady and relentless. In 13 minutes, everything would change. In 13 minutes, this would all be worth it. I took a sip of water from the glass in front of me. The ice had already started to melt. I looked out at the glittering city below, at people living their lives, unaware of the small drama playing out in this restaurant. Behind me, Marcus laughed at something on his phone, probably reading comments, probably showing his parents how viral my humiliation had become. They thought this was the end of the story. I closed my eyes for just a moment. I thought about George, my husband, who died 5 years ago. I thought about the 40 years before that, building something in silence. I thought about every decision, every sacrifice. George always said I was too cautious, too careful, always building safety nets nobody needed. He wanted to be bold, to take risks, to trust that everything would work out. He was the dreamer. I was the one who made sure we didn't fall. I was the one who bought the land under his stores. I was the one who saved the money he wanted to spend. I was the invisible foundation. He thought nobody needed those safety nets. But he was wrong. They needed them. They just didn't know it yet. And tonight, they were about to find out. The waiter returned with my tea. Earl Grey, just as I'd ordered. I thanked him quietly. He hurried away, still uncomfortable, still pitying me. I lifted the cup and took a sip. Simple, familiar, the same tea I'd been drinking for 40 years while I built an empire in silence. While George took the credit and Robert learned to take without asking, while I became invisible. My watch read 7:51 now. 9 minutes left. Behind me, Robert called for another bottle of champagne. I heard the pop of the cork, the cascade of liquid into glasses. Celebrating, victorious. I smiled, just a little, just enough for my own reflection in the window. In 9 minutes, everything would change. In 9 minutes, the beggar would reveal herself. In 9 minutes, 50 witnesses would see something unforgettable. But first, Robert needed to finish his champagne. He needed to feel like he'd won. He needed to be surrounded by witnesses when it all came crashing down. So I waited, patient, calm, the way I'd waited for 40 years while George built his reputation on my work, the way I'd waited 5 years while Robert destroyed what we'd built, the way I'd waited 18 months while I bought his debt. I sipped my tea. I looked at the city lights. I listened to my son celebrate behind me, and I counted down the minutes until his world ended. 8 minutes now. 7, 6. The second hand on my watch swept around and around. Time moved forward, relentless and unstoppable, just like the trap I'd built, just like the consequences he'd earned, just like justice finally arriving after 40 years of patience. I took another sip of tea. Set the cup down carefully in its saucer. Folded my hands again. My reflection in the window showed a calm, composed woman. Nobody would guess what was coming. Behind me, Sarah laughed at something Robert said. Marcus was still on his phone, still reading comments, still feeding off the attention my pain had brought him. None of them were watching me anymore. Good. Let them celebrate. Let them think they'd won. Let them enjoy these last few minutes of believing they were in control. Because very soon, everything would change. In 6 minutes, a waiter would bring Robert his check. In 6 minutes, he would learn something important. In 6 minutes, my son would understand exactly who his mother really was, and he would never forget it. To understand what happens in 6 minutes, you need to understand who I've always been. Not the beggar my son just humiliated, not the pathetic old woman sitting alone by the window, but the architect who built everything he's about to lose. Let me take you back. 40 years back. To 1985, when I was 23 years old and foolish enough to believe that love and hard work were enough, before I learned that invisibility could be a weapon. It started with George. It always started with George. My husband was magic, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they were the only person who mattered. Tall, handsome, with a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos. He opened our first store in the spring of 1985, Vance Home Goods, a tiny shop on Market Street that sold kitchen supplies and furniture. George stood outside on opening day, shaking hands, telling jokes, making promises. People loved him instantly. I stood inside behind the register, watching him work his magic. I was pregnant with Robert then, just starting to show. George would bring customers inside, tell them I was the brains of the operation, then wink like it was our little joke. It wasn't a joke. But nobody knew that yet. Not even George. He thought I just helped with the bookkeeping, balanced the accounts, paid the bills. Simple wife stuff, nothing important. The store did well, better than well. George had a gift for knowing what people wanted before they knew it themselves. Within 6 months, we were profitable. Within a year, we were thriving. George started talking about expansion. That's when I saw the problem. George was brilliant at sales, at reading people, at closing deals. But he was terrible with money. Not dishonest, just impulsive. He saw opportunity everywhere and couldn't understand why we shouldn't chase every single one. "Jennifer, we need a second location," he told me one night. Robert was 2 years old, asleep upstairs. George spread papers across our kitchen table, his eyes bright with dreams. "I found the perfect spot on 5th Avenue, prime location. We can't miss this." I looked at the numbers. The rent was astronomical. The lease terms were terrible. We'd have to drain our savings and take on debt just to cover the first 6 months. If sales didn't meet his projections immediately, we'd lose everything. "George, we can't afford this," I said quietly. I showed him the spreadsheet I'd built, the projections, the cash flow analysis. "If anything goes wrong, we'll be bankrupt in a year." He waved it away with that smile. "That's why we have to believe, sweetheart. This is how you build an empire. You take risks, you trust your instincts, you can't live your whole life afraid of what might go wrong." I loved him. God help me, I loved him. But I also knew him. I knew that George's instincts were brilliant for closing a sale and disastrous for long-term planning. I knew that his confidence could carry us far, but it could also destroy us. So I made a decision. I told George, yes, we could do the expansion, but only if I could handle the real estate side. Only if he'd let me negotiate the terms. Only if he'd trust me with the boring details. He agreed immediately. George hated boring details. He wanted to pick out inventory, design the layout, hire staff. He wanted the fun parts, the spreadsheets and contracts and property deeds. That was my job. What George didn't know was that I didn't lease that second location. I bought the building. I used money from a small inheritance my grandmother had left me. Money George didn't know existed. I put the deed in my name alone, then set up a simple lease agreement between me and Vance Home Goods. George never asked questions. He just saw that we had the space, the rent was reasonable, and he could focus on building the business. He never wondered who actually owned the building. It never occurred to him that his quiet, pregnant wife was building something separate. The second store succeeded. Then came the third, the fourth, the fifth. Every time, George found the location, made the pitch, charmed the investors. Every time, I handled the paperwork, and every time, I quietly bought the property separately. By 1990, we had 8 stores. George was a local celebrity, featured in the business section of the newspaper. "Self-made retail king builds empire," the headline read. There was a photo of George cutting a ribbon, that brilliant smile lighting up the page. I wasn't in the photo. I was at home with 6-year-old Robert, reviewing financial statements and property deeds, building the safety net George didn't know existed, creating the foundation that would save us when his dreams got too big. I didn't resent it. Not then. I believed in what we were building. I believed in George. I just didn't believe in risk without protection. So while he built the business, I built the fortress around it. Over the years, I established something separate from Vance Home Goods. I called it Vance Holdings, a simple LLC that held all the real estate. George signed the papers without reading them. "Whatever you think is best, sweetheart. You're so much better at this stuff than I am." Then I created the Vance Family Trust. Every quarter I took a portion of the profits from the business before George could spend them. Not enough that he'd notice, but enough to matter. I invested conservatively, diversified across stocks, bonds, treasury securities. George was busy chasing growth. 10 stores became 12. 12 became 15. He hired more staff, expanded product lines, poured money into marketing and advertising. He was building a retail empire, and everyone could see it. What they couldn't see was me, working late at night in our home office, buying properties, managing investments, building something that existed completely separate from the business everyone celebrated. I was creating 2 empires, not one. The public empire belonged to George. Vance Home Goods, with its gleaming stores and growing reputation. The visible success that everyone could see and measure and admire. That was his legacy, his dream, his name on every building. The Shadow Empire belonged to me. 12 commercial properties worth millions, an investment portfolio that grew steadily, safely, away from George's impulsive decisions. A fortress built on arithmetic and patience. That was my legacy, my insurance policy. George never knew. He died 5 years ago thinking that Vance Home Goods was our fortune. He never understood that the real wealth, the real power, was in the foundation I'd built underneath. The land he stood on, the trust fund he never saw. It wasn't deception, it was protection. It was a wife who loved her dreamer husband enough to make sure his dreams couldn't destroy their family. It was 40 years of invisible work that nobody valued because nobody knew it existed. When George died, Robert inherited the dream. The stores, the brand, the visible empire. He thought he'd inherited everything. He thought he was rich. He thought he was powerful. He thought his mother was just the old woman who'd helped his father with paperwork. He never asked who owned the buildings. He never wondered where the trust fund came from. He never questioned why his mother, the quiet bookkeeper, could afford to live comfortably on a small allowance. He just assumed. Like his father, he assumed. That was my mistake. I let them assume. I stayed invisible. I stayed quiet. I let George take the credit because I thought that's what a good wife did. I let Robert inherit the glory because I thought that's what a good mother did. But I kept the foundation. I kept the safety net. I kept the real power. Because somewhere deep down I knew that dreamers need architects. I knew that without the invisible work, the visible success collapses. I knew that one day someone would need to understand what I'd built. I just never imagined it would be like this. I never imagined I'd have to use my fortress as a weapon. I never imagined my own son would force me to reveal what I'd spent 40 years hiding. But here we are. My watch reads 7:53 now. 7 minutes until Robert's check arrives. 7 minutes until the architect steps out of the shadows. 7 minutes until everything I built in secret becomes devastatingly, publicly visible. I take another sip of tea. Behind me, Robert orders dessert. He has no idea that the invisible woman he just destroyed owns everything he thinks is his, but he's about to learn. In 7 minutes, the beggar becomes the queen. And the king discovers he never had a kingdom at all, he only had a stage. And I'm about to pull the curtain down. George died 5 years ago on a Tuesday afternoon in March. He was giving a speech at a retail conference in Chicago, talking about vision and growth and the future of home goods. Mid-sentence, between the words innovation and opportunity, his heart just stopped. They said he was dead before he hit the floor. They said it was quick, painless, the kind of death everyone hopes for. They said a lot of things at the hospital, but all I heard was silence. 40 years of marriage ended between 2 words. The funeral was massive. Over 300 people came to say goodbye to George Vance, the retail king, the self-made success story, the man who built an empire from nothing. The church couldn't hold everyone. People stood in the back, spilled out onto the steps. Robert gave the eulogy. He was 33 then, already working in the business, already learning to fill his father's shoes. He stood at the podium in a black suit, his voice breaking at all the right moments, and he made promises. "My father was a visionary," Robert said, looking out at the sea of mourners. "A builder, a man who created something from nothing and gave our family everything we have. I promise you, Dad, I promise everyone here, I will honor your legacy. I will take Vance Home Goods to heights you only dreamed of." The crowd applauded. People wiped their eyes. Sarah sat in the front row, her hand on Robert's empty seat, playing the supportive wife perfectly. I sat beside her, silent in my black dress, my hands folded in my lap. Nobody applauded for me. Nobody mentioned that George's empire had a foundation. Nobody knew. And in that moment, sitting in that church full of people celebrating a man they only half understood, I decided to keep it that way, just a little longer. 2 weeks after the funeral, we gathered in Mr. Davis's office for the reading of the will. Davis had been our lawyer for 20 years, a sharp man in his late 50s who understood exactly what George and I had built, even if George hadn't. Robert sat across from me, Sarah beside him, both of them composed and expectant. This was just a formality. Everyone knew Robert would inherit everything. George had talked about it for years. When I'm gone, it all goes to Robert. He's ready. He'll take it further than I ever could. Mr. Davis adjusted his glasses and began reading. "To my beloved son, Robert George Vance, I leave the entirety of Vance Home Goods, including all retail operations, inventory, vendor relationships, the brand name, trademarks, intellectual property, and all business bank accounts and operating capital, along with management authority over all 15 store locations." Robert exhaled, relieved. Sarah squeezed his hand, her smile bright and satisfied. They'd gotten what they expected: the golden cradle, the visible empire, the kingdom everyone could see. Then Mr. Davis continued, "However, the following assets remain under the sole ownership and control of Jennifer Marie Vance." He paused, looked at me, then at Robert. "The Vance real estate holdings, including the deeds to all 12 commercial properties currently leased to Vance Home Goods store locations, plus 3 additional investment properties." The room went very quiet. Robert's smile faltered. Sarah's hand tightened on his arm. Mr. Davis wasn't finished. Also remaining under Mrs. Vance's sole control is the Vance Family Trust, the complete liquid investment portfolio valued at approximately $14.7 million, including stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and treasury securities. Silence, complete silence. Robert stared at Mr. Davis, then at me, his expression shifting from confused to concerned. Sarah's perfectly composed face cracked just slightly. "Wait," Robert said slowly. "Mom, that means you own the land under the stores?" His voice was careful, like he was trying to understand a foreign language. "Yes," I said simply. My voice was calm. I'd known this moment was coming for 2 weeks. I'd prepared for it. "And the investments? The savings? The liquid assets?" Robert's voice rose slightly. Sarah was already doing math in her head. I could see it in her eyes. "Yes," I said again. There was nothing else to say. George had structured it exactly this way. We discussed it years ago, sitting at our kitchen table, me explaining why the foundation needed to stay separate from the business. Robert forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Okay, that's fine. I mean, obviously this is temporary, right? Eventually you'll want to simplify things, consolidate everything under one structure. It makes sense, right?" "Robert," I said gently, "your father and I structured things this way for a reason. The business and the foundation serve different purposes. They need to stay separate." Sarah leaned forward, her voice honey-sweet and patronizing. "Jennifer, we completely understand that you and George built this together. You absolutely deserve security and peace of mind. But realistically, you're 63 years old now. Managing commercial properties, investment portfolios, all those spreadsheets and tax documents, that's a lot of stress at your age. I'm quite capable of managing my own assets," I said evenly. But I could see it in their faces. They didn't believe me. They thought I was too old, too tired, too out of touch to understand what I was holding. Robert nodded, trying to be diplomatic. "Of course you are, Mom. We're not trying to push you. But when you're ready, maybe in a year or 2, we should talk about transitioning everything into a unified family structure, for simplicity, for efficiency, so you don't have to worry about all the complicated financial stuff anymore." "I'll consider it," I said, but I was already seeing the future, already understanding how this would unfold. They weren't offering to help me, they were planning to wait me out. Mr. Davis cleared his throat. "Mrs. Vance has also structured a monthly disbursement to assist with family expenses during the transition period." He looked at his notes. $12,000 per month, transferred directly to Robert's personal account. Robert's face fell. 12,000? Dad was pulling in 10 times that from the business. His disappointment was so naked, so childish, I almost felt sorry for him. "Your father was pulling profits from a growing business," I explained patiently. "You're receiving a dividend from stable investments. There's a difference. The business profits are yours to manage." "This is separate." Sarah whispered something to Robert, but I heard it anyway. "It's fine. Once she transfers everything, we'll have full access." She didn't bother to lower her voice enough. She wanted me to hear, wanted me to know they were already planning my obsolescence. That's when it started, the slow erosion of respect, the gradual transformation from mother to obstacle. It didn't happen overnight. It happened in 1,000 small cuts over 5 years. The first family dinner at Robert and Sarah's new house, bought with business funds, decorated by professional designers. I brought a homemade dessert, George's favorite recipe. Sarah took it with a tight smile. "Oh, Jennifer, you didn't need to bother. We have a caterer." The pie disappeared into the kitchen. I never saw it again. I was seated at the far end of the long table, away from Robert and Sarah and their important friends, like a relative they had to invite but didn't actually want. I sat there watching my son hold court, telling stories, making deals, building his reputation on the foundation I'd created. 6 months after George died, I attended my first board meeting. I still had advisory rights written into the company structure. Robert was presenting an expansion plan, aggressive and ambitious. I reviewed the numbers quietly and raised my hand. Robert, these projections assume 40% year-over-year growth, but current stores are only growing at 8%. Where does the additional revenue come from? My voice was gentle. I wasn't trying to embarrass him. I was trying to help. He smiled at me like I was a confused child. Mom, that's the whole point of expansion. New markets, new customers, new revenue streams. This is modern retail strategy. But you're leveraging $12 million in debt at 9% interest, I continued. If sales don't meet projections in year 1, you won't be able to service the debt. The numbers don't support the risk. Sarah actually laughed. Jennifer, this is exactly why businesses stagnate. Fear of risk, fear of growth. She looked around the table at the other board members, all Robert's new hires, young and ambitious. We can't run a 21st century company with 1980s thinking. Robert nodded, emboldened by his wife's support. Mom, I appreciate your concern, I really do, but this is 2020's business. We run algorithms now, not calculators. We have data analytics, market modeling, predictive software. This isn't the world you and Dad built anymore. It's evolved. The other board members nodded. One actually said, maybe Mrs. Vance would be more comfortable focusing on her personal interests. Let Robert handle the strategic decisions. They smiled at me like I was a well-meaning grandmother who'd wandered into a boardroom by accident. I said nothing. I gathered my papers and left the meeting early. Nobody tried to stop me. Nobody asked me to stay. I drove home in silence, understanding finally and completely that my son saw me as a relic, a burden, an old woman clinging to relevance. That night I sat in my home office and looked at the numbers. Robert's expansion plan was going to fail. The math was clear. He was spending money he didn't have on growth he couldn't sustain. Within 2 years, maybe 3, Vance Home Goods would be drowning in debt, and when it happened, he would come to me. He would ask me to sign over properties, liquidate the trust, throw my safety net into his sinking ship. He would expect me to sacrifice 40 years of careful planning to fix his mistakes. I opened my laptop and started a new spreadsheet. Not to save the business, not yet, but to prepare for the moment when saving it would require teaching my son a lesson he would never forget. That invisible didn't mean powerless. That quiet didn't mean weak. That the foundation mattered more than the stage. The golden cradle Robert inherited was beautiful and shiny and completely hollow. The stores, the brand, the reputation, all of it stood on land he didn't own, supported by capital he couldn't access, built on a foundation he didn't understand. George gave him the stage, the spotlight, the applause. But I kept the power. I kept the real empire. And as I sat there that night, watching the numbers on my screen, I knew. One day Robert would force me to use it. One day the architect would have to step out of the shadows and show her son exactly what she'd built. I just didn't know it would be in a restaurant, in front of 50 witnesses, with the word beggar still echoing in my ears. But here we are, 5 years later, and the golden cradle is about to shatter. My watch reads 7:56, 4 minutes until the check arrives, 4 minutes until Robert learns that the stage was never the kingdom, that the real power was always mine, that the beggar he humiliated is the queen who's been holding his crown the entire time. I finish my tea, set down the cup, fold my hands, and wait for the lesson to begin. Betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It's not one moment, one argument, one cruel word. It's 1,000 paper cuts over 5 years until you're bleeding and nobody even notices you're wounded. 18 months after George died, I walked into a board meeting. Robert stood at the head of the conference table, his presentation displayed on the screen behind him. Vance 2, bold growth for a bold future. 5 new stores, celebrity partnerships, luxury home goods line. The board members were all new faces, young executives Robert had hired, all of them nodding along, taking notes. Sarah sat beside him in a designer suit, her new title brand director printed on the agenda. Robert clicked through slides showing revenue projections. 40% growth year over year, $12 million in new capital, beautiful graphs climbing upward like staircases to heaven. I looked at my tablet, at the actual numbers I'd pulled from the company accounts. Robert, these projections assume sales that are 5 times your current growth rate. Where does that revenue come from? He didn't even pause. New markets, Mom. New products. That's how expansion works. His tone was patient, like he was explaining something simple to someone slow. You're leveraging $12 million in debt at 9%, I said quietly. If sales miss projections by even 15%, you won't be able to service the debt. The company could default. Sarah laughed first, a light tinkling sound. Jennifer, this is exactly why businesses stagnate, fear of risk. The young board members smiled. One of them leaned forward. Mrs. Vance, with respect, this is modern retail strategy. We run predictive algorithms, market analytics. It's data-driven. His voice was kind but dismissive, like explaining color to someone who only sees black and white. Robert picked up his remote. Mom, you ran calculators. We run algorithms. This is 2020's business, not 1985 accounting. Different world, different rules. He clicked to the next slide. The meeting moved on. I sat there, invisible again. Nobody asked my opinion for the rest of the meeting. When I left early, nobody noticed. 2 years later, Thanksgiving dinner at Robert and Sarah's house. Their mansion, really. 10,000 square feet bought with company funds, professionally decorated, catered meal for 20 people. I arrived with a homemade pumpkin pie using George's mother's recipe. Sarah met me at the door. Oh, Jennifer, you brought something. She took the pie like it was a wet towel. How sweet. We have a full dessert spread from the caterer, but I'm sure someone will try it. She handed it to a server. I never saw it again. The dining table was long, formal, set with china I didn't recognize. Robert and Sarah sat at the head with their important friends, business partners, Sarah's parents. I was seated at the far end, next to distant cousins I barely knew. Robert stood to give a toast. I'm thankful for this family, for the legacy my father left me, for the opportunity to build something even greater. He raised his glass. Everyone applauded. He didn't mention me. Not once. Marcus walked past my chair with his phone, barely glancing down. Grandma, do you even know how to use a smartphone? His friends laughed. Robert was 10 feet away, refilling his wine glass. He heard it. He said nothing. I ate my turkey in silence at the end of that long table. When I left after dinner, only one person said goodbye. Not Robert, not Sarah. One of the cousins, being polite. 6 months ago, everything broke. Robert and Sarah came to my house unannounced. No phone call, no warning, just knocked on my door on a Tuesday afternoon, both of them in business clothes, both of them grim-faced. We sat in my living room. I offered tea. They declined. Robert pulled papers from his briefcase and spread them on my coffee table. Mom, I need your help. Vance Home Goods is facing a liquidity crisis. His hands were shaking slightly. The expansion didn't perform as projected. We're carrying $18 million in debt and we need to restructure. I looked at the papers, loan documents, a lender I didn't recognize. What kind of restructuring? My voice was steady, but my heart was already sinking. I need you to sign over the distribution center property as collateral, Robert said. I found a lender willing to give us a $10 million bridge loan, but they need real estate collateral. Something solid. Sarah leaned forward, her voice urgent. It's the only way to save the company, Jennifer. We've exhausted every other option. Her eyes were hard. This wasn't a request. This was a demand. I picked up the loan documents and read them carefully. Every word, every clause. The room was silent except for the ticking of my grandfather clock. This is a 14% interest rate, I said finally, with a balloon payment in 2 years. If you can't pay back the full $10 million plus interest, the lender seizes the property. Robert nodded impatiently. I'll pay it back. I just need time to turn things around. 2 years is plenty. With what revenue? I looked up at him. You're already underwater. Your current stores aren't generating enough to service existing debt. Where does the money come from to pay this back? We'll figure it out, Sarah snapped. We always do. But we need you to act now. We need you to trust Robert. Trust your own son. I set down the papers. If I sign this and you default, 300 employees lose their jobs. The distribution center is the last unencumbered asset. It's the safety net. If you lose it, there's nothing left to save. Robert stood up, his face flushing red. So you'd rather hoard property than save your son? Then save Dad's legacy? His voice was rising. This is exactly what everyone's been saying. You're too old to understand modern business. You're holding on to assets you can't even manage. I'm holding on to the foundation your father and I built, I said quietly. The one you're trying to tear apart to fix your mistakes. Sarah stood too, her voice cold. Then you're choosing money over family. You're choosing to let the company die rather than help Robert. She picked up her purse. I hope you can live with that decision. Robert looked at me one more time. Sign over the distribution center, and everything goes back to normal. Your monthly allowance continues. You're part of the family. You're welcome at dinners, at holidays, at board meetings. He paused at the door. But if you refuse, you're cut off. No more money, no more family events. You're on your own until you come to your senses. His voice was final, a threat and a promise. I'm not signing, I said. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I'm not enabling you to destroy what we built. I'm not sacrificing 300 jobs for your pride. They left. The door closed. I sat alone in my living room, staring at the loan documents on my coffee table, understanding that everything had just changed, that I'd just lost my son by refusing to let him destroy himself. 2 days later, my phone started ringing. Robert's cousins, his friends, distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. All of them with the same message, slightly different words. Robert told us you're refusing to help save the company. He says you're not thinking clearly. He's worried about your mental state. I called my niece directly. Did Robert say something about me? My voice was calm. She hesitated, uncomfortable. He said you're becoming financially paranoid, that you're making irrational decisions, that he's concerned you might be experiencing early dementia. She said it gently, like she was trying to soften the blow. Is everything okay, Aunt Jennifer? Do you need help? The smear campaign had begun. Robert wasn't just cutting me off. He was destroying my reputation, making sure everyone believed I was the problem, making sure that when the company collapsed, nobody would blame him. They'd blame the crazy old woman who refused to help? My monthly payments stopped. The $12,000 that appeared in my account every month, gone. Robert's message was clear. Sign the property over, or starve. He thought I had no other income. He thought I needed that money to survive. He had no idea that the allowance he'd cut off was actually rent from properties he didn't know I owned. He had no idea that I had $14 million in investments he couldn't touch. He just cut off a payment stream that was legally mine and called it punishment. For 6 months, I didn't hear from him. No calls, no texts, no invitations to birthdays or holidays. The entire family froze me out. I became invisible again. Not the quiet architect this time, just the crazy old woman who chose money over family. But those 6 months gave me something. Time, clarity, absolute certainty that my son had forgotten where he came from, that he'd forgotten who built the ground he stood on, that he needed to be reminded in a way he would never, ever forget. So I made calls. I reviewed documents. I met with lawyers and accountants, and I started buying. Quietly, systematically, patiently. I bought the restaurant, I bought his debt, I bought the rope he'd used to hang himself, and I waited for him to tie the knot. Tonight he tied it. Tonight he called me a beggar in front of 50 witnesses. Tonight he gave me exactly what I needed. Public humiliation, recorded evidence, witnesses who would remember. And in 3 minutes, he's going to learn what happens when you forget who holds the foundation. My watch reads 7:57. 3 minutes. I fold my hands and wait. The 1,000 paper cuts are about to become one clean surgical strike, and this time everyone will see the blood. 18 months ago, I sat across from Mr. Davis in his law office. The same office where we'd read George's will 5 years earlier, same leather chairs, same diplomas on the wall. But this time, I wasn't there to receive inheritance. I was there to build a trap. Jennifer, are you sure about this? Davis leaned back in his chair, reading glasses perched on his nose. He'd been my lawyer for 25 years. He knew me well enough to recognize the look on my face. I spread papers across his desk, property listings, market analyses, cash flow projections. Robert's going to implode. The expansion is failing. He's drowning in debt he can't service. Within a year, maybe 18 months, he's going to come to me demanding I bail him out. Davis nodded slowly. And you want to prepare for that moment. It wasn't a question. He'd watched me build the foundation 40 years ago. He understood how I thought. I want to own the ground under his feet, I said quietly. Literally. I want every property he operates on, every building he uses, every piece of land his business touches. I want him to realize that nothing he thinks he owns is actually his. Davis removed his glasses and cleaned them carefully. That's aggressive, Jennifer. That's expensive. And it's going to take resources. He looked at me seriously. Are you prepared to spend that kind of capital on revenge? It's not revenge, I said. The words came out sharper than I intended. It's protection. It's making sure that when he crashes, he doesn't take 300 jobs with him. It's making sure I have leverage to save what George and I built. And yes, it's teaching my son a lesson he apparently never learned. Davis smiled then, just slightly. What do you need from me? He pulled out a legal pad and picked up his pen. We spent 3 hours mapping it out. Property acquisitions, shell companies, holding entities, ways to buy aggressively without Robert noticing. The Vance real estate holdings had been generating income for decades. 12 properties leased to various businesses, including Robert's own stores. He paid rent every month through the company accounts, never questioning where it went, never wondering who actually owned the buildings. That rental income had been accumulating in a separate account. George never touched it. Robert didn't know it existed. Over 40 years it had grown to just over $4 million. Not as much as the family trust, but enough. More than enough for what I needed. Target properties near Vance home goods locations, I told Davis. Shopping centers, warehouse districts, commercial real estate that's stable, valuable, and that Robert might need someday. I pulled out a highlighted list, and this one, the Gold Leaf restaurant. Davis looked at the listing. The restaurant on 5th and Market? That's expensive, Jennifer. The owner is asking $2.8 million. He scrolled through the details. Why a restaurant? Because it's Robert's favorite place, I said simply. He takes all his important clients there. He celebrates every business win there. Sarah loves it. They go twice a month minimum. I want them to sit in a building I own. I want them to eat food paid for by rent I collect. I want them to feel safe and powerful in a place that's completely mine. Davis made notes. The owner is retiring. We could approach him directly, make an offer he can't refuse. He looked up. How much above asking are you willing to go? 15%, I said without hesitation. $3.2 million, all cash, close in 30 days. I want this property, Davis, whatever it takes. I pulled out account statements. I have the liquid capital. Make it happen. 3 weeks later, Davis called. We have it. The owner accepted immediately. All cash offers tend to do that. I could hear the smile in his voice. Closing is set for next Friday. The restaurant will continue operating normally. Same staff, same management. They just have a new landlord. On closing day, I met the restaurant manager. Elena Martinez, 52 years old, had been running the Gold Leaf for 8 years. She was sharp, professional, and intensely loyal to the business. When she learned I was the new owner, she looked worried. Mrs. Vance, are you planning changes? The staff is concerned. We've heard rumors about new ownership meaning layoffs or restructuring. Her hands twisted together. She was trying to be professional, but I could see the fear. No changes, I said gently. You keep running the restaurant exactly as you have been. Same menu, same staff, same standards. I'm not here to interfere. I paused. But I need to tell you something. My son, Robert Vance, he comes here often. Elena nodded. Yes, Mr. Vance is a regular customer. Very good customer. He has a standing reservation for the corner table. She smiled slightly. He tips well. The staff likes him. He's going to continue coming here, I said carefully. And I need you to treat him exactly the same as you always have. Same service, same table, same everything. But Elena, there may come a night when I need something from you. A small thing, nothing illegal, nothing harmful. Just a moment of timing. She looked at me, confused but listening. What kind of moment? Her voice was cautious. She was trying to understand what I was asking without agreeing to something she couldn't deliver. I'll know when it happens, I said. And when that night comes, I'll be here. I'll be sitting at a table, just like any other customer. And I'll need you to bring my son his check at a very specific moment. Can you do that? Elena studied my face for a long moment, then she nodded slowly. Mrs. Vance, you own this restaurant. You pay my salary. You've promised no changes, no layoffs. If you need me to bring a check at a specific time, I'll bring a check at a specific time. Thank you, I said quietly. We shook hands. She had no idea what she just agreed to. I barely knew myself. But I knew it would matter. I knew that someday that moment would come. Over the next year I bought 6 more properties. A shopping plaza 2 blocks from a Vance Home Goods location, a warehouse complex in the industrial district, a parking structure, each one purchased through a different holding company, each one with a different corporate name, each one invisible to anyone not looking carefully. And then I found something interesting, something I should have noticed years ago but hadn't. The distribution center where Robert ran his logistics operations, where he stored inventory, where 300 employees worked every day. I pulled the property deed. My name. The land belonged to me. I'd bought it 20 years ago when George wanted to expand shipping operations. I'd purchased the property and set up a simple lease agreement. The rent was paid automatically from the company accounts every month. George never thought about it. Apparently, Robert hadn't either. I called Davis, the distribution center. Robert's been operating on my land for 5 years since George died. Is the rent still being paid? I could hear him typing, pulling up records. It was, he said slowly. But Jennifer, it stopped 6 months ago, right around the time Robert cut off your monthly allowance. More typing. He canceled the automatic payment, probably thought it was part of your monthly dividend. He had no idea it was actually rent for property he's using. I sat back in my chair, a smile spreading across my face. So he's been operating on my land for 6 months without paying rent. How much does he owe? The numbers were already forming in my head, but I wanted to hear Davis confirm it. $40,000 per month for 6 months, Davis said. $240,000 in arrears. Jennifer, this is leverage. Real leverage. If he defaults on rent, you can legally evict him. You can shut down his entire distribution operation. No, I said softly. I don't want to shut it down. I want him to know. I want him to realize that when he cut me off, when he stopped my allowance, he actually stopped paying me rent. I want him to understand that his cruelty was also his stupidity. Davis laughed then, a real laugh. Jennifer, you're terrifying. You know that, right? His voice was full of admiration. What's the end game here? When do you spring the trap? I'll know when the moment comes, I said. The same thing I told Elena. I'll feel it, and when I do, everything I've built over the past 18 months will come together in one perfect moment. Robert will understand exactly who his mother is, and he'll never forget it. That moment came tonight, in this restaurant that I own. At that table where Robert sits celebrating, drinking champagne he can't afford, when he screamed at me, when he called me a beggar, when he humiliated me in front of 50 witnesses. That was the moment. That was when I knew. I glance across the restaurant. Elena stands near the kitchen, watching. Our eyes meet for just a second. She nods slightly. She understands. She's ready. In 2 minutes she'll bring Robert his check. In 2 minutes this all begins. My phone buzzes in my purse. I pull it out discreetly. A text from Davis. Papers filed. Property records updated. Everything is official. You own it all. Good luck. I text back a single word. Thanks. I check my watch. 7:59. 1 minute until 8 o'clock. 1 minute until Elena brings the check. 1 minute until the invisible lease becomes devastatingly publicly visible. 1 minute until my son learns that the beggar he humiliated owns the ground beneath his feet. I fold my hands on the table, take a sip of my tea, and wait for the world to shift. 1 year ago, I sat in Mr. Davis's office again. This time I brought a different kind of document. Not property listings, not real estate portfolios, bank statements, credit reports, debt instruments, a complete financial autopsy of Vance Home Goods. Davis spread the papers across his desk, his reading glasses reflecting the fluorescent light. This is worse than I thought. He looked up at me, his expression grave. Robert has $18 million in company debt, high-interest loans, overdue supplier invoices, a $10 million venture capital loan at 12%. He's bleeding cash every month. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. Can the company survive this? I already knew the answer. I'd run the numbers a dozen times, but I needed to hear Davis say it. Not the way Robert's managing it, Davis said bluntly. The expansion failed. The luxury line isn't generating revenue. He's making minimum payments on high-interest debt, which means the principal barely moves. At this rate, Vance Home Goods defaults within 18 months. Maybe less. The words hung in the air between us. George's empire, 40 years of work, 15 stores, 300 employees, all of it circling the drain because my son thought algorithms could replace arithmetic. I want to buy it, I said quietly. Davis looked up sharply. I want to buy the debt, all of it. He set down the papers slowly. Jennifer, do you understand what you're saying? That's not buying property, that's buying obligations. That's becoming Robert's creditor. That's putting yourself in position to own the company if he defaults. I know exactly what it is, I said. My voice was steady. I've spent 40 years building a safety net, $14.7 million in the Vance Family Trust, conservative investments, steady growth, untouched capital. I built it for this, for the moment when the dream crashes and someone needs to catch it. Davis removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. This is aggressive, Jennifer. This is taking control away from your own son. Are you prepared for what that means? For how he'll react when he finds out? He won't find out, I said simply. Not until it's too late. That's why I need you, shell companies, holding entities, anonymous purchases. I want to buy Robert's debt without him knowing I'm the buyer. Davis was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a legal pad. Walk me through it. What exactly do you want to acquire? I pulled out my own notes. Pages of research, creditor names, loan amounts, interest rates. Start with the supplier debts, the small ones. There are 12 vendors he owes money to, amounts ranging from $20,000 to $200,000, total of about $1.4 million. Suppliers are often willing to sell debt at a discount, Davis said, making notes, especially if the debtor is struggling. They'd rather get 70 cents on the dollar now than wait months for full payment that might never come. We could probably acquire that debt for under $1 million. Do it, I said. Approach each one separately. Offer cash, quick close. Don't mention my name. Use a holding company. Make it look like a standard debt acquisition. I moved to the next item. Then the bank loans. He has 4 different business loans totaling $6 million. Can we buy those? Davis thought for a moment. Banks are trickier. They don't usually sell performing debt. But if Robert's making minimum payments and they're concerned about default, they might be willing to offload the risk, especially to a buyer with cash and good credit. We'd have to approach them carefully. Show that we're a legitimate entity interested in acquiring distressed commercial debt. I have the credit, I said. The Vance Family Trust is pristine. 40 years of conservative investments, no debt, solid returns. Any bank would consider us a qualified buyer. I paused. What about the big one, the $10 million venture capital loan? Davis whistled softly. That's the crown jewel. The VC firm holds that loan at 12% interest. It's secured against the business assets, which means if Robert defaults, they own Vance Home Goods. They have all the leverage. Which means they'll sell if the price is right, I said. VCs don't want to run retail businesses. They want returns. If we offer them a clean exit, full principal plus accrued interest, no legal hassles, they'll jump at it. Davis did the math on his calculator. That loan plus interest is currently at about $10.8 million. You're offering to pay them in full to transfer the debt to you? He looked at me seriously. Jennifer, that's more than 70% of your entire trust fund. One loan. Are you absolutely certain? I met his eyes. I'm certain. That loan is the key. Whoever holds it controls Robert's future. Right now, it's a VC firm that doesn't care about him, doesn't care about the employees, doesn't care about George's legacy. If I hold it, I can control what happens when he defaults. I can save the company. I can protect the jobs. I can restructure without destroying everything. Davis nodded slowly. All right. I'll need 2 months to set this up properly. Shell companies take time to establish. Debt purchases require due diligence, negotiations, legal documentation. But Jennifer, you need to understand something. Once you own this debt, you're not his mother anymore. You're his creditor. You have legal rights, legal obligations. If he defaults, you can force restructuring. You can take control of the company. I know, I said quietly. That's exactly what I'm counting on. I gathered my papers. Start with the suppliers, then the bank loans, save the VC loan for last. And Davis? Complete confidentiality. If Robert finds out I'm behind this before I'm ready, everything falls apart. 3 months later, Davis called me. The supplier debts are done. We acquired all 12 for a total of $890,000. The holding company now owns $1.4 million in Robert's obligations. He has no idea. As far as he knows, his suppliers sold the debt to a collections company. Good, I said. I was sitting in my home office, spreadsheets open on my laptop. What about the banks? 2 of the 4 agreed to sell, Davis reported. $3.2 million in debt acquired for $2.9 million. The banks were happy to offload the risk to a qualified buyer. The other 2 banks declined. They still think Robert can turn it around. That was fine. I didn't need all of it. I just needed enough. And the VC loan? I held my breath. This was the one that mattered, the one that would give me real leverage. They agreed, Davis said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. $10.8 million, cash, close in 30 days. They're thrilled. They get full payment, no risk of default, clean exit. The paperwork is being drawn up now. I closed my eyes, feeling a mix of relief and something darker. Satisfaction. Do it. Whatever it takes. I want that debt in my hands before Robert even knows it's for sale. The closing took place on a Wednesday morning. I sat in Davis's conference room, signing document after document, transfer agreements, promissory notes, debt assignments. By noon, I owned $15.4 million of Robert's $20 million in total debt. You now control 77% of his obligations, Davis said, reviewing the final numbers. Suppliers, banks, and the VC loan. Jennifer, you're not just a creditor, you're the majority creditor. If Robert defaults on any of these loans, you have the legal right to force restructuring. You can take operational control of Vance Home Goods. I signed the last document. My hand was steady. What about the employees? If I force restructuring, what happens to them? Davis flipped through his notes. That's up to you. As majority creditor, you'd have significant influence over any restructuring plan. You could protect jobs, preserve salaries, maintain operations. Or you could liquidate assets and recover your investment. The choice would be yours. I'm not liquidating, I said firmly. That's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this to save what George and I built, to protect the people who've worked for us for decades, to teach my son that foundations matter more than facades. Over the next 3 months, I did something I'd never done before. I went to the stores, not as the owner's mother, as a customer. I walked through the aisles, watched the employees work, talked to the managers quietly. I met Thomas, a warehouse supervisor who'd been with the company for 28 years. Mrs. Vance, he said, his eyes filling with tears. I'm scared. Robert's making changes, cutting hours, delaying paychecks. My pension is tied to this company. If we go bankrupt, I lose everything. I met Sarah, not my daughter-in-law, but a sales associate who'd worked the floor for 15 years. Your husband built something good here, she told me. But I don't know if Robert understands what he has. I don't know if he cares about us or just about the numbers. I met James, a delivery driver with 3 kids and a mortgage. Robert canceled our health insurance last month, said it was temporary, just until cash flow improves. But Mrs. Vance, my son has asthma. We can't go without insurance. His voice cracked. I don't know what to do. 300 employees. 300 families depending on jobs that Robert was destroying. 300 reasons why I'd spent $15 million buying his debt. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about them, about protecting what mattered when the person in charge had forgotten it mattered. I made them a promise. To Thomas in the warehouse, to Sarah on the sales floor, to James in the loading dock. I'm not going to let this company fail, I said quietly. I'm not going to let you lose your jobs, your pensions, your security, trust me. I've been protecting this company for 40 years. I'm not stopping now. They believed me. Because I'd been there from the beginning. Because I'd known their names when Robert didn't. Because I was the quiet woman who'd always made sure paychecks cleared and benefits continued and Christmas bonuses appeared even in lean years. I drove home from those visits with a weight on my shoulders. This wasn't just about teaching Robert a lesson anymore. It was about 300 people who needed the company to survive, who needed someone to catch them when everything fell. Tonight, sitting at this table, watching my son celebrate with champagne he can't afford, I think about them, about Thomas and Sarah and James and the 297 others whose lives depend on what happens next. My phone buzzes. I glance down. A text from Davis. Final creditor agreements filed with the court this afternoon. It's official. You're the majority creditor, holding 73% of Vance Home Goods obligations. If he defaults, the company is yours. Clock starts now. I text back. Thank you. 2 words. 40 years of preparation. $15 million in carefully acquired debt, 300 jobs hanging in the balance. And in 1 minute, my son is about to learn that the beggar he humiliated is the silent partner who holds his future in her hands. I check my watch. 8 o'clock exactly. Elena catches my eye from across the restaurant. I nod slightly. She picks up a leather check folder and starts walking toward Robert's table. The clock has started, and the silent partner is about to become devastatingly loud. At 8 p.m., I gave Elena the signal. She understood without a word, slipping the check toward Robert's table. I watched from across the room as she told him his tab was closed under new ownership. His arrogance didn't falter at first. He asked who this so-called new owner was, convinced it was some mistake. That was my cue. I rose, and the room fell quiet. 50 diners turned their heads as my heels tapped across the floor. I could feel their curiosity, the way silence rippled outward like a tide. When I stopped at his table, I didn't need to raise my voice. I wanted every syllable to land like glass breaking. I told him the truth. He'd been dining in my restaurant. For a moment, his smirk lingered, then faltered. Sarah's face drained of color, and Marcus lowered his phone midstream. Even in that pause, I could see Robert's brain scrambling for a way to dismiss me, to twist this into one more of his games. But there was no game left to play. I let the next twist drop. The distribution center, the foundation of his empire, had never been his. It sat on my land, and he owed me $240,000 in back rent. The number hit him harder than any insult ever could. I saw it in his shoulders, in the way he gripped the edge of the table. Sarah squeezed his arm, demanding an explanation. But he had none. Still, that wasn't the final blow. I leaned close so only he and those nearest could hear, though I knew the whole room would feel the weight of it. I told him I owned his debt. Every penny. $20 million. I was his bank now. His lips moved, but no words came. The man who had built his entire life on bravado looked suddenly small, trapped in a booth he could not escape. The restaurant held its breath, 50 witnesses to his collapse. Marcus, regaining his nerve, lifted his phone again. His live stream ticked past 1,200 viewers, strangers delighting in Robert's undoing. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I simply ordered dessert. And then, with the same calm I had carried into this evening, I told them to leave my restaurant. They rose in silence, shuffling toward the door like figures already fading from memory. The diners watched them go, whispering, but not intervening. The heavy door closed behind them, and with it, the last illusion Robert had of power. I sat back down at their table, still warm from their presence. Elena placed the dessert menu in front of me, and I selected tiramisu. Around me, conversation slowly resumed, though the air still buzzed with disbelief. As I lifted the first spoonful, I caught Elena's eye. We didn't need words. The game was finished. I stayed at my table for another 20 minutes after Robert left. I finished my tea slowly, savoring the quiet. The other diners gradually returned to their meals, the drama fading into whispered conversations. I paid my own check, left a generous tip, walked out into the cool night air. My phone rang as I reached my car. Mr. Davis. Jennifer, it's done. Robert just left the restaurant. I'm assuming it went according to plan. Exactly according to plan, I said quietly. I sat in my car, key in the ignition, not starting it yet. What happens tomorrow? I'll call an emergency board meeting for 8 o'clock, Davis said. I'll present the debt documents, give Robert the ultimatum, 30 days to repay $20 million or you force restructuring. He'll have no choice but to accept the terms. I closed my eyes. Make sure Patricia knows. She's the only board member I trust. Patricia had been with George since the beginning. She understood what we'd built. She'd see this for what it was. I'll brief her tonight, Davis promised. Get some rest, Jennifer. Tomorrow starts the real work. I drove home through empty streets, parked in my driveway, sat in the dark car for a long moment before going inside. My small house, my quiet life, built on a foundation nobody saw. The next morning I didn't go to the board meeting. I sent Davis alone. I couldn't face Robert yet. Not while the wound was still fresh, not while he still thought fighting would change the outcome. Davis called me at 9:15. It's done. Robert tried to claim sabotage. Patricia shut him down with financial reports. She's been documenting his mismanagement for months. The board knows you're the only option. And Robert? I asked. I was sitting in my home office, the same place I'd spent 40 years building what nobody valued. He said nothing, Davis replied. Just sat there, white-faced, silent. The 30-day clock starts today. Jennifer, he can't pay this. You know that, right? I know, I said quietly. That's the point. I don't want the money. I want the company. I want to save it before he destroys it completely. 2 days later, I drove to the warehouse. I'd called ahead, asked the operations manager to gather everyone. All 300 employees. I needed to look them in the eyes when I made my promise. I stood on a platform made of pallets, a microphone in my hand. 300 faces looked up at me. Worried, scared. These were the people who mattered. Thomas, Sarah, James. Real people with real families. I'm not here to shut down this company, I said. My voice was steady. I'm here to save it from the man who's been bleeding it dry. I showed them documents, the debt, the mismanagement, the risks to their jobs and pensions. But you're going to keep your jobs, benefits restored, pensions protected. I'm taking control, and my first priority is protecting every single one of you. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then Thomas started clapping, then Sarah. Then all 300 erupted in applause that shook the metal walls. People were crying, hugging, shouting thank you. I stepped down from the platform. Thomas grabbed my hand. Mrs. Vance, we've been so scared. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on us. Sarah, the sales associate, was crying. Your husband would be proud. This is what Vance Home Goods was supposed to be, taking care of people. I shook hands for an hour, listened to stories, heard about sick children and mortgage payments and college tuition, heard about the fear they'd been carrying for months, watched relief replace terror on 300 faces. I drove home exhausted, emotionally drained, but lighter somehow. Because I'd kept my promise. Because 300 people would sleep better tonight. Because the foundation I'd built for 40 years was finally doing what it was meant to do. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. Robert's mortgage bank called the office. Foreclosure proceedings starting. His personal creditors are panicking. He's got nothing left. I set down my phone, looked out my kitchen window at the small garden George planted 20 years ago, and I felt it. Not victory, not satisfaction, just the heavy weight of consequences finally arriving after being delayed too long. The first 15 days I heard nothing from Robert. Not a call, not a text, not a single word. I knew what he was doing, scrambling, calling every bank, every investor, every contact in his phone, begging for loans he'd never get. Mr. Davis updated me daily. First National declined, said his debt-to-income ratio makes him unqualified. Venture capital partners declined, said they won't throw good money after bad. He tried 3 private lenders, all refused. I sat in my kitchen, listening to the reports, feeling nothing, no satisfaction, no guilt, just the hollow certainty that this was always how it would end. Robert had built a house of cards. I was just the wind. Day 18, Davis called. He's trying to sell assets. The mansion is listed. 3 luxury cars up for auction, even his watch collection. A pause. Jennifer, everything's underwater. He owes more than any of it's worth. He has nothing left, I said quietly. Not a question. A statement of fact. 40-year-old arithmetic finally catching up to 30-day-old desperation. What happens now? Now we wait, Davis said. 12 more days, then it's over. Over. Such a small word for the collapse of everything Robert thought he was. Day 22, I was in my garden pruning roses George had planted when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Jennifer? Sarah's voice. Cold, clipped. I thought you should know. I'm leaving Robert. I've filed for separation. I sat down on the garden bench. Sarah. My voice caught. Whatever she was still Marcus's mother, still the woman my son loved. Don't, she interrupted. I'm citing financial irresponsibility and emotional negligence. I'm taking Marcus. We're staying with my parents. I just thought you should hear it from me before the lawyers call. She hung up before I could respond. Day 26, Patricia called. Jennifer, you need to know. The mansion is dark. Utilities shut off. Landscaping company quit. The house looks abandoned. Her voice was gentle. Robert's still there. Neighbors say his car is in the driveway, but the lights are off. I closed my eyes, pictured my son alone in that massive house, 10,000 square feet of darkness. All those rooms he'd bought to prove he'd made it. Empty now. Silent, cold. Day 28. Rain hammered against my windows. I was making dinner, something simple, when I heard knocking. Urgent, desperate. I opened the door. Robert stood on my porch, soaking wet. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair plastered to his head, his eyes were hollow. "Mom," his voice cracked. "Please, I'll lose everything. The house, the business, Sarah, everything." He dropped to his knees on my wet porch. "Please help me." I looked down at my son. On his knees, begging, the way he'd told me to beg on streets. The symmetry was almost poetic. Almost. "You already lost it," I said quietly. "The day you called me a beggar in front of 50 people. You lost it then." I stepped back. "Come inside. You're getting my porch wet." He stumbled in, dripping on my modest hallway floor. I handed him a towel. He stood there, shaking, whether from cold or shock I couldn't tell. I gestured to the kitchen table. "Sit." I put tea on to boil, sat across from him, pulled a folder from the counter and placed it between us. "I have an offer, one time only. You listen, then you decide." He nodded, unable to speak. I opened the folder. "You step down as CEO of Vance Home Goods. Immediately. I appoint new management. You keep a 10% stake in the company, and you receive a salary of $80,000 per year." His head snapped up. "80,000? That's—" He stopped, remembering, understanding. "That's what you called my paltry allowance," I said evenly. "The amount you thought was insulting, the amount you mocked. You'll live on it. You'll learn to budget. You'll understand what you dismissed." I pushed papers across the table. "And one more thing. You call every family member you lied to. Every person you told I was mentally declining, financially abusive, irrational, you tell them the truth. And if I refuse?" His voice was barely audible, already knowing, already broken. "Then I foreclose. The company liquidates. 300 people lose jobs, and you get nothing." I looked him in the eyes. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for them. For the people who need those jobs. For the foundation your father and I built." He picked up the pen. His hand shook so badly he could barely sign. But he did. Every page, every clause, every surrender. When he finished, he looked up. "I'm sorry." Tears on his face. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I took the signed papers, put them back in the folder. Sorry doesn't rebuild what you destroyed, but it's a start." I walked to the door, opened it. The rain had stopped. "Go home, Robert. Tomorrow we start fixing what you broke." He stood, walked to the door, stopped. "Did you ever love me, or was this always the plan?" His voice was broken, desperate for something to hold on to. "I've always loved you," I said quietly. "That's why I'm saving you from yourself." I closed the door, stood there, listening to his car start, drive away, stood there until the sound disappeared into the night. Then I sat at my kitchen table, the signed papers in front of me, and I cried, not from victory, from the weight of watching your own child destroy himself and knowing that saving him meant breaking him first. 6 months later, I stood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony outside a newly renovated Vance Home Goods location. Not a grand expansion, just a careful, sustainable upgrade of an existing store. Patricia stood beside me, scissors in hand, smiling at the small crowd gathered. "This is how we grow," Patricia said into the microphone, slowly, carefully, with respect for what we have and the people who built it. She cut the ribbon. The employees cheered, customers applauded, local news cameras recorded everything. A reporter approached me afterward, young woman with a notebook and eager eyes. "Mrs. Vance, you've been called the matriarch who saved a family business from bankruptcy. How does it feel?" I looked at the store, at the employees working inside, at Thomas directing the warehouse team, at Sarah helping customers on the sales floor. "It feels like coming home," I said simply. "This is what my husband and I built. This is what matters." The reporter scribbled notes. "And your son, Robert? What's his role now?" Her voice was careful, professional. Everyone knew the story. The viral video had ensured that. "Robert is learning," I said. "Learning what it means to build something that lasts. Learning the difference between a stage and a foundation." I smiled politely. "If you'll excuse me." I walked away before she could ask more. That afternoon I met Robert at a small coffee shop downtown. Neutral territory. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, staring into his cup. He'd lost weight. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by simple clothes. He looked older, tired, real, mom. He stood when he saw me, pulled out my chair, small gesture, something George used to do. "Thank you for meeting me." His voice was quiet, humble, so different from the man who'd screamed at me 6 months ago. I sat, ordered tea. We were silent until the server left. "How are you, Robert?" Simple question, loaded with 6 months of rebuilding. "I'm in therapy," he said. No preamble, no excuses, twice a week. Sarah agreed to couples counseling. We're not back together, but we're talking. Marcus is speaking to me again. He looked up, met my eyes. "I'm trying, Mom. I'm really trying." I nodded, sipped my tea, waited. He needed to say whatever he'd asked me here to say. I'd learned the power of silence, the strength in waiting. "I'm sorry." The words came out rough, unpracticed, like he'd been rehearsing but couldn't get them right. "For not seeing you, for not respecting you, for treating you like you were irrelevant when you were the only thing holding everything together." I set down my cup. "I don't need your apology, Robert." His face fell. I continued before he could spiral. "I need you to do better, not for me, for yourself, for Marcus, for the 300 people who depend on this company." "I'm trying," he repeated, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup. "The 80,000. I'm living on it, budgeting. It's hard, really hard. But I'm learning." A bitter laugh. "You were right. It's not a paltry allowance. It's what most people live on. I just never knew because I never had to." "And the calls?" I asked. "To the family? The condition I'd imposed, the confession he'd had to make. Did you tell them the truth?" He nodded. "Every single one. Uncle Tom, Aunt Marie, all the cousins. I told them I lied, that you weren't mentally declining, that you were protecting the company from my mistakes." He looked down. "Most of them hung up on me. Some are still not speaking to me. I don't blame them." We sat in silence for a moment. The coffee shop buzzed around us, normal people living normal lives, not knowing they were witnessing a mother and son trying to find their way back to each other across a canyon of broken trust. "Patricia says you come to the warehouse sometimes," Robert said. "That you talk to the employees, that they trust you more than they ever trusted me." No bitterness in his voice, just observation, acceptance. "They trust consistency," I said. "They trust someone who keeps promises. They trust the foundation, not the performance." I paused. "Your father was the performance, I was the foundation. You tried to be both and became neither." He flinched, but nodded. "I understand that now." He finished his coffee. "Thank you, Mom, for saving the company, for saving me even though I didn't deserve it." He stood, hesitated. "Can we do this again, coffee, next month?" I looked up at my son, saw the boy I'd raised somewhere in that tired man's face. "Yes," I said softly, "we can do this again." He left. I sat alone with my tea, feeling the slow, painful process of healing. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe someday. The next week, Marcus appeared at my door, 18 now, graduated high school, standing on my porch in jeans and a plain t-shirt, nothing designer, nothing expensive. "Grandma, can we talk?" I let him in, made tea. He sat at my kitchen table, nervous, picking at his thumbnail. "I want to work at Vance Home Goods," he said finally. "Not in the office. In the warehouse. I want to learn how things really work." I studied him carefully. "Why?" Simple question, testing his sincerity. Too many people had promised change and delivered nothing. "Because Dad taught me to look down on people," Marcus said. His voice was steady, certain. "He taught me that money meant worth, that position meant power, that people who worked with their hands were less than people who worked at desks." He looked up, met my eyes. "You taught me to look at them, to see them, to understand that the foundation matters more than the stage." I felt something crack in my chest, something warm and unexpected. Hope. "You start Monday," I said. 6 a.m., warehouse shift. Thomas will train you. You'll load trucks, manage inventory, learn every job from the ground up. "Thank you, Grandma." He stood, paused at the door. "I'm sorry. For what I said at Thanksgiving. For filming you at the restaurant. For being part of it." Tears in his eyes. Real remorse. "I was wrong." "You were 17, I said gently. "You were repeating what you'd been taught. But you're 18 now. You get to choose who you become." I touched his shoulder. "Show me who you choose." The following Monday I drove to the Gold Leaf. I hadn't been back since that night 6 months ago, the night everything changed. I walked through the door. Elena saw me immediately, her face lit up. "Mrs. Vance," she hurried over. "Your usual table?" She gestured to the window seat where I'd sat alone that night, where I'd waited for the trap to spring, where I'd watched my son's world collapse. "Yes," I said, "my usual table." I sat down, ordered Earl Grey tea, looked out at the city glittering below, watched life continue, unaware and unbothered by the small dramas of revenge and redemption playing out in restaurants and warehouses and coffee shops. My tea arrived. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, and I thought about everything. 40 years of invisible work, 5 years of watching my son destroy what I'd built, 18 months of preparing the trap, 1 night of springing it, 6 months of rebuilding. Was it worth it? The money, the planning, the public humiliation, the broken relationship, the pain. Was proving my worth the cost? I didn't know. Maybe I'd never know. But I knew this. 300 people still had jobs, had pensions, had security. Thomas's son could manage his asthma. Sarah could afford her mortgage. James could send his kids to college. The foundation held. The stage might have collapsed, but the structure beneath survived. And Robert was learning, slowly, painfully, but learning that respect isn't demanded, it's earned. Learning that foundations matter more than facades. Learning what his father never taught him and what I'd spent 40 years proving. That invisible doesn't mean powerless. That quiet doesn't mean weak. That the people you dismiss, the work you don't value, the foundations you take for granted, those are the things that matter when everything else falls away. I finished my tea, left a generous tip, walked out into the afternoon sun. My small car waited in the parking lot. My modest life waited at home. My invisible empire waited in property deeds and trust funds and debt documents that nobody saw but everyone depended on. And I was okay with that, more than okay, because I'd learned something too. I'd learned that vindication doesn't feel the way you think it will. That breaking your son to save him leaves scars on both of you. That revenge and justice aren't the same thing, even when they look identical. But most importantly, I'd learned that the work matters. The invisible work. The thankless work. The foundation building, safety net creating, arithmetic-driven work that nobody applauds until everything starts falling. That work matters, even when nobody sees it. Especially when nobody sees it. So to anyone listening to this story, to anyone who's ever been dismissed, overlooked, called irrelevant or out of touch or too old to understand, to anyone who's built something in silence while others took credit, to anyone who's been the foundation while someone else played on the stage, your work matters, your patience matters, your quiet strength matters. And one day, when the loud ones stumble, when the performers forget their lines, when the stage collapses under the weight of ego and recklessness, they'll realize they were standing on your shoulders the entire time. Build your foundation, protect your worth, and never ever let anyone make you beg for what you've already earned. Because the invisible ones, we're the ones who hold everything together. And that's not weakness, that's power, the kind that lasts, the kind that matters, the kind that saves lives when empires fall. Every day I share new stories about everyday people who were overlooked, dismissed as irrelevant. Stories about the foundations nobody sees until everything starts falling. If you enjoyed this story, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. And if this resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. Have you ever been underestimated? I read everyone, and your story matters too.